I remember very vividly a time when I was younger and I figured out a little bit more about pastors. My next older sister, Denise, was friends with the pastor's daughter. The pastor at the time was Pastor Zimmerman. I don't even know what his first name was. It was just Pastor Zimmerman. And I remember when I got a chance to go over to the Zimmerman's house on a Sunday afternoon in order to swim at his pool. And I thought that was really weird. I mean, I'd never, ever seen the pastor outside of church before. It's kind of like when you see a teacher out in the grocery store when you're a kid. It's like the weirdest thing, like, oh, I thought they lived at the school. No, they don't live at the school. But that's kind of how I felt about pastor. So I remember going to his house, and as I walked into his backyard, I looked over, and there he was. I have it seared into my brain. He was wearing the wife beater t-shirt, and he had on a pair of black shorts and a pair of black socks and no shoes. And he was extremely white. I don't think, his skin saw the sunlight a whole lot. And he was laying out by his pool. And I walked in and I looked at him and he looked at me, and I had never seen a pastor that way. And he's like, "Hey, how you doing, Mark?" And I remember I stood there like, what do I say? Is he still Pastor Zimmerman? He looks really weird and odd in how he's dressed. I vowed I would never wear white beater with black socks out in public at sunset time period. It was very strange to see a pastor in a normal type setting. I had teased this topic a couple weeks ago when the writer of Hebrews opens up the discussion on Jesus is greater than the high priest. And I had teased it by talking about how Jesus is greater than pastors, and I said a couple things about that, but I didn't go into a whole lot of depth because I knew that this was coming up. In fact, he's going to keep bringing this topic up because it's very important for us to understand where our faith lies. Our faith does not rest in a person here on earth. Our faith rests in God and in Jesus. And as he goes through this, he's going to make the claim that Jesus is greater than the high priest. For our discussion, we don't really have a high priest. Unless you're Catholic, then you would say Jesus is greater than the Pope. And that would be still a very true statement. And I think most people would assent to that normally. But I think there are still things that we do in our lives that make us think that maybe our pastor is greater than God or even as equal to God. If you have ever prayed a prayer and then said, "I really should let the pastor know because the pastor's prayers are more effective than mine." Now, I know you're probably not going to say it that crassly, are you? Now, I don't mind if you say, "I would like the pastor to know what I'm praying for so that he can join me in prayer, and also so that he can know about things, and so that he can also receive care, he can give us care," then that is quite all right. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you believe that my prayers are more effective than your prayers, you need to know that Jesus is greater than pastors. If you believe that my life is more holy than yours, if you believe that I have all the answers, then you might need to hear this sermon, and Jesus is greater than pastors. If you have ever had someone who you want to talk to about Jesus Christ, that you want them to know who he is, and you want them to know about his grace and his mercy and his love. And if your response to that is, let me introduce you to my pastor who will tell you all that, then you might suffer from this malady of believing that the pastor has it all together. When I was in seminary, I was taught very strictly, Jacob, you're going to hear this too, to never divulge too many sins from the pulpit. And I think in a sense, I think there's something that's good about that. But I think that it turns pastors more into politicians. Have you noticed with politicians, has anyone ever heard a politician admit that they were wrong and apologize for something? It was funny as I was thinking about this, I'm like, do I know any, like, I wasn't around for Nixon. Did Nixon apologize or did he just resign? He just resigned. Did he ever say, I'm really sorry for that whole Watergate scandal. That should have been, I shouldn't have, I don't even know the full story on that. I shouldn't have spied on the DNC. I think, is that what it was? Anyway, did we ever hear anyone, like, I'm thinking with politicians, I think it's a code within politicians. Whatever happens, do not apologize, do not admit wrongdoing, and never say you're sorry. And I think sometimes pastors have that same tendency. And what happens is pastors often put themselves up as good examples. And when pastors do that to such a degree, you might come to the faulty conclusion that pastors are perfect. Pastors are not perfect. Pastors are sin-filled. Pastors don't have all the answers. Pastors have lots of problems. Jesus is better than a pastor. I know that some of you, I mentioned it a couple weeks ago, and it's been a very fascinating study. It's a podcast that's put out by Christianity Today called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. Jason, I caught up. So I'm now back I'm now up to speed where you're at. I'd missed a couple of episodes. And those are really freaky episodes. The whole demon hunting thing, that was bizarro. What happened is Mark Driscoll, as a pastor, set himself up in such a way that people were no longer thinking about Jesus, but were worshiping a person. And the reason why I can say that, though I don't think that he intentionally was trying to gain fame, fame was thrust upon him. But the problem is, if a pastor ends up being removed for various reasons from his church, and then because of that, the entire church with thousands of attendees, that the church crumbles in the matter of 2 weeks, then that means that pastor was worshiped more than Jesus. If you have been hurt by a pastor or a church in the past, and it caused you to walk away from God, then you also might need to listen to this sermon as well. Jesus is greater than pastors. I don't want anyone to ever think, or anyone to ever believe, that I've got everything all together, for people to think that I know everything, and that if something happens and I die this week, that's really weird saying that. I shouldn't say stuff like that, right? Yeah. If something bad happens to me, the church should continue on. Or if you believed in a pastor so strongly as a kid, and then that pastor fails, and you ended up falling away, you had too much faith in the pastor. I'm praying that you know that Jesus is greater than me? I know you kind of know that. You assent to that. It's very easy to say, yeah, I believe that. But do you believe in it practically in all the things in life? I had a real struggle when I was younger because we had a controversy that happened at our church when I was little. Not little, I was a teenager. And it was really, really bizarre. And thankfully, I knew kind of a little bit of the stuff that was going on because my mom was really active in the church and she was part of the church council. She knew a lot of things. But I remember when a brand new pastor had shown up. He replaced Pastor Zimmerman. This pastor shows up, and within a couple of months, the pastor fires the youth worker, a DCE, a male DCE, and at the same time removed from service the organist that had played at our church for years, who was a female. And the church rose in an uproar against the pastor who fires this DCE and fires this organist and sends him packing. And I remember thinking to myself, man, church is messed up. This is crazy. Why do I even think that this is a good institution? And I was actually a little perturbed at a pastor who would come in and do such horrible things. And then my mom sat me down and said, you may not know the whole story. And I go, really? She says, well, you're old enough, I guess I could tell you. Yeah, the pastor found out that the DCE and the organist were having an affair. They're married to other people, and they were having an affair. He found out about it. He fired both of them. Didn't tell the entire church. Kept it under wraps to keep their honor and keep their respect, but fired them. Wouldn't tell the elders why he fired them, and so they fired him, and that's kind of what happened. Wow, yeah. What was really funny about this was this pastor, Pastor Tierfelder, he didn't want to be our pastor. He had told me privately, he's like, it's really weird. I was getting ready to retire. I was finally finished with my pastoral career. I'm so excited. I'm going to retire and I'm going to be done with it. And then he gets this call to this church. He's like, no, I'm done. I'm retiring. And he says, it was the weirdest thing. God told me, go to this church. And I was like, no, I'm not going to that church. God, I'm retiring. I'm getting out of the business. And God told him to go. And so he went, and now he figured out why he had to go there, because he was the only one that could walk in, fire both of the people, knowing he himself was going to get fired. And when they said, you're relieved of duty, he says, oh, so that's why I was brought here. Okay, now that makes sense, because I don't care if you fire me, because I was retiring anyway. It's amazing how God does that. But I remember thinking that church was a messed up place. And it's true. Church is messed up. If you take a look right now around at these people, everyone sitting here is totally messed up. Heather, don't stare directly at your son. That's always a bad thing. You already know that. He knows that about you. Some people, again, have the mistaken belief that the church is the place that you go when you're perfect, and when you are finally perfect, you come to church and then you worship God. No. Church is the place where messed up people with horrible sins come, find grace and mercy in Jesus Christ, and then learn how to continue to live their life, hopefully in honor of glory of Jesus. So if you have a struggle with any of those things, if you believe the church is the perfect place, if you believe the pastors are supposed to be perfect, if you believe that pastors' prayers are better than your prayers, if you believe that pastor's life is holier than yours, if you believe that there are people in here that are just fundamentally better than you, then you really need to listen to this to understand why you should never have your faith in a church or in a pastor. You should have your faith in Jesus Christ. All right, so he's going to start giving us, again, this is where I think the break should happen. And he's also going to tell us how we should also live our lives and how we should be able to approach God. Verse 14, chapter 4, verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we professed. Newsflash, I have not been to heaven. And I think that's a good thing, because if I was in heaven, I wouldn't be here. So I have not been to heaven, but Jesus has. And because Jesus has been to heaven and has come back, that tells us a little bit. Jesus has died and then came back to life. Why is that important for us? Because you will die and then you will come back to life. That's why having faith in Jesus is much better than having faith in me or any other religious person. And for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who was tempted in every way, just as we were, yet was without sin. And that was the topic I covered a little bit. Again, to remind you, Jesus has experienced all the temptations you have. Yeah, every single one of them. Was Jesus tempted to be prideful? Yeah. Was Jesus tempted with money? Was Jesus tempted with fame? And we would have to believe that he was also tempted by members of the opposite sex. He was tempted in every way. So when we go to God and say, God, I'm really having a struggle with, God doesn't go, oh, well, that's really stupid. Why haven't you figured that one out yet? Jesus says, yeah, I know how you feel. I know the challenge that you're going through. I know the pain that you're experiencing. I know the temptation that you're facing. And because I know it, I can also help you with that. I can give you strategies. I can help you to stand up underneath that load, or I will then provide for you a way out so that you can escape from that. So I'm not going to go into that any further, but I think it's great to know that Jesus was tempted in every way, but was without sin. Because of that, let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. I tell you, I was very scared when I went over to Pastor Zimmerman's house. Like, I didn't know what to do. Like, what do? Do I bow? Do I say, sir? Like, it's really awkward. But you know who didn't have a problem with that? Was Pastor Zimmerman's kids. You know what they did? They approached Daddy all the time. You know what they called him? Daddy. Hey, Dad. Hey, Pop. Hey, Padre. What's up? Every single, and I was sitting there watching. I'm like, that is amazing. She seems so comfortable just going up to this guy, but I'm terrified of him. And I don't know why I was terrified. He was a smaller guy. He wasn't like big and assuming like this. He was just a normal looking guy. He had a smile on his face. He was one of the happiest pastors I'd ever met. But I was terrified. I had no confidence. Question, is that what you think of God? When you have sinned greatly, how confident are you to go before God? I think a lot of us, when we have sinned gratefully, we are standing there looking at God going, I just don't think I can come close. When people are trapped in sin, the last place they usually go to is church. Because at church, they're going to be talking about God, and they don't want to talk about God because God is going to be really angry with my sin. But let me tell you, no matter what's going on in your life, you can still approach the throne of God with confidence. I'm curious what that's going to be like. I really do. I think that one song, I Can Only Imagine, is really true. I can only imagine. Like, when I see Jesus, am I going to just fall to my knees like going, oh my goodness, I've heard all about you, dude. I've read your books. Fantastic. I know all your greatest hits. Or are we going to run up and give him a hug? I want you, the writer of Hebrews specifically tells you, approach the throne of grace confidently. If you have a prayer request, congratulations, you don't need me. Now, please, again, send me your prayer requests. I pray for people. But let me tell you this, my prayer is no better than yours. You have the same access to God that I do. Isn't that amazing? This isn't the way it's always been. Again, the way that the Israelite nation had been set up was this high priest. If you had a prayer, if you had a confession, if you needed to do something with God, you had to go to the high priest first. And then the high priest would hear your confession and go, oh my gosh, you are messed up. I don't know if they would do that. That's what I would do. And then they'd say, well, okay, let's kill this cow. Let's kill this goat. Let's kill this pigeon. And we're going to pray to God. And you can't pray to God because you don't have access to God. But I, as a high priest, have access to God. So I will pray on your behalf. And then it'll work. You don't need that. You don't need anybody. You don't need someone in the middle to pray for you. You can pray right now. And when you pray, God is listening to you the same as he's listening to me. God doesn't go, oh, wow. Hold on, wait, hold on, everyone. Mark's praying. Hold on. Everyone, shh, quiet. Hey, Gabriel, quiet. Mark's praying. I got to hear this one. This one's going to be important. No! You know what happens when you pray? God listens to you. Jesus is greater than pastors because the high priest, Jesus is greater than that high priest. That barrier has been broken. The wall of separation is now gone. I mean, this is the reason why we talk about it every year, Good Friday. Jesus dies, and the veil is torn in two. Remember the veil? That's the veil where you only can enter into God's presence once a year, the Day of Atonement. No, that's it. You have access right now. You could stop listening to everything I say, and you can be praying to God. And you know what God is doing? He's listening to you. It's amazing. Yes, Becky, you have a question? Who is Professor Xavier? Professor what? Oh, X-Men. Oh, I don't know X-Men. Yeah. It's really hard because, again, we try to think about this, and I think we've even made movies, Bruce Almighty, right? Isn't that a great, I love that movie. That was one where, what's the guy's name? The actor. Jim Carrey. Yeah, so Jim Carrey becomes God, and he's going to answer all these questions. And so he gets, he's hearing all these prayers. And so you know what he does? He just says yes to everybody. And then there's mad chaos because everyone was praying to win the lottery. So everyone won the lottery, and everyone got only 17 cents from the lottery. It's a great thing, right? And he's just like, yes. And he's like, yeah. It's a human way of thinking. We don't understand it, but God can hear everyone. Right now, if 3 people are praying about something different, right now, he hears it all. Every church that's happening right now, he's hearing it all. And he's here. And he's there. And he's everywhere. And he's here. I don't know exactly how it works. When we get to heaven, we'll find out. I think we are all going to approach the throne of grace separately, but all at the same time. And don't ask me how it works. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. So approach with, you should really definitely underline that. Approach the throne of grace with confidence. So when you have someone in your life you need to pray for, you pray for them. Yes, send me the prayer request too. I'll pray for them. And again, I don't know exactly, I don't think it's one of those things, I've talked about this, where God, looks at someone and is like, oh man, Aunt May is, close to dying. And 20 people prayed, but it wasn't enough. If only one other person, there's another person praying. Okay, I guess God doesn't, it's not a scale like how many people vote, then God's going to, it's more about helping us understand and get tuned in with God. Again, I've said the quote before, it's a great quote. Prayer is not how I change God. Prayer is about how God changes me. When I pray for other people, you know what I'm doing? I'm getting my eyes off my situation. And I'm helping myself understand that there is a wide world out there with a lot of people. And my job is to care and to love. So pray, but go and pray yourself. And if someone asks you about Jesus Christ, approach the throne of grace with confidence. You have way more power than you think you do. It's important for you to know that. So we approach with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So when you come to faith, it's not because of a person. It was because of God. And that's the reason why you don't sit there and wonder, well, I was baptized by this person, or I was led to faith by this person. No, it was all God's action, and we all have confidence in that. That means, did you know this? You can lead someone to Jesus. It's amazing. And you're like, but I don't know enough about the Bible. Newsflash, neither do I. I'm learning, I'm growing, I've been to seminary, I've been doing this for a while, but there's still a whole lot and you know what? I find out that God usually tends to use the people who are less religiously educated to accomplish much more in this world. I really do. And by the way, I'm one person. Got a bunch of people here. The amount of work that can get done by all of us is incredible to impact the kingdom. All right, got to keep going. Chapter 5, again, an unfortunate chapter break, because it talks about how every high priest is selected from among men and is appointed to represent them in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. You know, this is what you would do back in the olden days. You would find a guy, you're like, you're going to be, but you had to make sure that they had the right pedigree. They had to come from the correct tribe. And we kind of do that nowadays. Like, well, okay, we're going to have this person is going to be the pastor, and they came from this educational background. But you know the nice part about it is Jesus was not chosen by men. Guess who chose him? God himself. I don't know exactly how that works either. So again, Jesus is greater than the high priest because high priests were just selected amongst the people. And then it talks about he is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. Now that's a pretty important thing. Again, it's a reminder that pastors and religious leaders are all weak. We're all weak. In fact, I dare say that the devil loves to work overtime, especially on religious leaders. I think that's the reason why, and again, I think the bigger the church, I think the bigger target is on your back. Whatever you do, please do not tell people about Searchlight, okay? Just keep it small, keep it easy. I've often thought about that. What would have happened if Searchlight would have just exploded in growth? Was I ready to handle that? I don't think I was. And I continue to learn and grow. But I'm weak. I am subject to ego. I'm subject to pride. I'm subject to tons of temptation. And I sin. But do you know who doesn't sin? Jesus. It's because Jesus is greater than pastors. And I love it because some of you are like, well, wait a second, Mark, aren't you then supposed to be able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray? Mark, you're not too gentle with the ignorant. And you're like, yeah, you are right. I have a real problem with this. And that's something that I got to work on. But this is why, verse 3, this is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as for the sins of the people. So on the Day of Atonement, guess who he's offering sacrifices for? Himself. Because he's a sinner. Now again, if you ever find a pastor who claims to be perfect, run. Run fast. You do not want to be around that. And I think, again, this was one of the reasons of the fall of Mars Hill. I think it was one of the reasons why a lot of pastors in large churches are subject to this idea of you cannot question me. Let me tell you, people question me all the time. I've said this before, I'll say it again, because I'm wrong a lot. And I'm okay with that, which is why I love it when I get corrected. Keeps me humble. But that's why, did Jesus have to sacrifice his body for himself? Did Jesus die on the cross for his own sins? No, because he's perfect, because Jesus is greater than pastors. And it goes on, verse 4, no one takes this honor upon himself. He must be called by God, just as Aaron himself was. So Christ also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, you are my son, today I become your father. And he says in another place, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. He wasn't chosen among men. He was directly appointed by God. You are it. You are the priest. And then this is what he says. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. All of those are great things for all of us. You know what we should do? We should offer up prayers and petition with loud cries and tears, and we should be submitting reverently to God. We should do that, because that's what Jesus does. And Jesus is the gold standard. And your pastor is imperfect and he sometimes makes mistakes. I'm going to admit something, and I've actually done this in a devotion before, so you might have heard this, but it is true that there are times that I fall short when you come to me and you ask for prayer requests. There are times I get the prayer requests and then I forget about them. Do you know why? Because I'm human and I forget. Yeah, I'm inspiring a lot of confidence. They're like, we're not going to go to you with prayer requests anymore. But sometimes it has happened that then I'll see you and you're walking towards me and I'll go, dear Lord, please be with this person because they asked for a prayer request. Amen. So good to see you. I've been praying for you. Yeah. Do you know why? Because I'm a sinner. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but I'm telling you it does. You know who doesn't do that? Jesus. When you pray to God, Jesus prays on your behalf. Isn't that insane to think about? Jesus prays for you? It's incredible. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. We follow God not because we want stuff. We follow him because he is the right one. He's the right path. We obey not for gifts, we obey because he is perfect. And verse 8, although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. And this is twice now. It's like, who is Melchizedek, and what is this all about? You'll find out in a couple weeks. He actually goes into a much bigger detail on Melchizedek. It's chapter 7, so we're going to save that for later. Jesus is good. I looked up online, and it was very interesting. I found this really fascinating thing it was pastors cannot. Did you know that there are a lot of things that pastors can't do? Shocker. Pastors cannot know everything. It is true. We try our best. Recently, I was chastised by a local pastor who was not attending the circuit meetings, of which I'm called a circuit counselor. That means I'm the head of the circuit, which means I just have to do a lot more work. And anyway, this pastor hadn't been showing up to meetings. And he called me up on the phone and he says, Mark, I have a problem with you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Like what? And he's like, how come you haven't called me? I'm like, well, are you still part of everything? You retired, so I'm trying to, you haven't noticed that I've been gone? I've been going through a lot of stuff. I'm telling you, he says, I was circuit pastor many a time, circuit counselor, and you really need to know when people are having problems. Yeah, I'm like, Okay, I'm really sorry. I say that as an example for you. I may not know what you're going through. And I don't know everything. I really don't. I would like to try. Do you know who does know everything? Because Jesus is greater than pastors. And if you got something, come and tell me. Also, pastors cannot do everything. That's why we have wives, so they can then do all the stuff that pastors can't do. I can't do everything. Pastors cannot be everywhere. But do you know who can be everywhere? Because Jesus is greater than pastors. Pastors cannot read minds. I am so glad I cannot read minds. I would be shocked if some pastors talk about it. In fact, that was one of the things that Mark Driscoll even talked about. He's like, he could see people's sins. He could look at someone and see their sins. And I'm like, oh, no. I don't want to be looking out. All of a sudden, like a little thought bubble pops up, and I see your, no. I cannot read your mind. I have no idea what you're going through. But do you know who does know everything and can read your mind? Jesus, because Jesus is greater than pastors cannot be God. We already established that. Did you know that pastors can't change hearts? But do you know who can? Jesus, Holy Spirit, because Jesus is greater than pastors. Pastors cannot please everybody, and we shouldn't. We cannot live a sinless life. We cannot make churches grow. We cannot be a financial expert. We cannot avoid mistakes. We cannot avoid favoritism. We cannot share everything. We cannot ignore sin. We cannot empower you. We cannot erase anyone's sins. This is a great one. We cannot put people in heaven or hell. Let me tell you, that has helped me at a lot of funerals. Because do you know when I speak, do you know that person does not change? You know, it's not like, oh, this person was a great person and they believed in Jesus, and Jesus is like, no, he didn't. Well, I guess he said it. I guess we're going to, hey, can you call up Frank? Frank, yeah. This guy said you believed in me, so yeah, go ahead, come on. No, I have no idea. I can't put people in heaven or hell. Only God can. I cannot make money come to people. This one I disagree with slightly. I cannot preach every sermon with perfection. Oh, wait, what was that? Be sinless, make mistakes. Yeah, okay, yeah. Let me tell you, I try to preach every sermon with perfection, and almost inevitably, the sermons that I feel bombed terribly, people tell me were the greatest, and the ones that I'm like, man, that was a great sermon, people are like, eh. I cannot force you to be like me. I cannot monitor people. I cannot understand everyone. I cannot force everyone to see things their way, and I cannot impart to a congregation what we don't have. But do you know who can do all these things? Yeah, Jesus, because Jesus is greater than all pastors. So what do? We approach the throne of grace confidently. We trust in God. If something happens and you move away, your faith is not dependent upon me or this church. That's not to say don't stay connected. Obviously, still stay connected. That's a great thing. But your faith does not reside in this building, in this person, or in the people around here. Your faith should reside in God and God alone. So if you need to reorient yourself, I'm telling you, please don't put your faith in me. I promise you I'm going to mess up. I have been known to wear shorts with black socks. I have been known to make a lot of mistakes, many of which I am ashamed of. But I will do this for you. I'm going to point you to Jesus. He has all the answers. He has everything you need. And he has already said, come to me.